The night Jade Morrison slid into the wrong car changed everything, though she wouldn't understand that until much later, when she was standing barefoot in her kitchen at sunrise, replaying every single second of it like a song she couldn't stop humming. It was 11:58 p.m. on a Friday in late October, and Chicago had decided to remind everyone it was alive and indifferent. The wind came in off Lake Michigan like it had a grudge, tearing down Michigan Avenue in sheets, sending napkins and dry leaves spiraling between the ankles of people still brave enough to be outside. Jade was one of those people, barely. She stood hunched under the awning of the Velvet Room, a jazz bar on West Wacker Drive, where her best friend Simone's birthday party had just ended in a spectacular, champagne-soaked blur. She'd had 2 glasses of Prosecco and 1 very ill-advised whiskey sour, not quite drunk but beautifully warm around the edges, that liquid courage state where everything felt a little softer than it usually did, where the city lights on the wet pavement looked like scattered jewelry. Her phone said her Uber was a black Honda Civic, driver named A, for minutes away. She squinted at the street. A black car idled at the curb 30 feet ahead, hazards blinking amber in the rain. Jade did what tired women with heels that had been cutting into their ankles for 4 hours do, she decided. She yanked her coat tighter, ducked her head, and jogged. The door handle gave. Warm air hit her like a wall, something cedar and clean, faintly like rain on hot pavement, so utterly different from the cold outside that she exhaled with sheer relief and dropped into the back seat, pulling the door shut behind her. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, pushing wet hair from her face. "It is absolutely vicious out there. Can we do Lincoln Park? The address should be." She looked up. The woman in the driver's seat was not looking at a GPS. She was not wearing an Uber placard. She was twisted around in the front seat, staring at Jade with an expression that occupied the precise midpoint between amusement and total bewilderment, dark eyes wide, one brow lifted, mouth slightly open. She was beautiful in the unself-conscious way that women are when they haven't been told about it enough to perform it. Brown skin, thick natural hair pulled back loosely, wearing a gray hoodie unzipped over hospital blue scrubs. She looked like someone who had been through 13 hours of something difficult and was on the other side of it, glowing with that particular quiet that comes after a very long fight. "I think," she said slowly, in a voice that was warm and low and a little amused, "you might be in the wrong car." Jade blinked. She looked at the back of the headrest. No Uber sticker. She looked at the center console, a phone face down, a crumpled receipt, a Dunkin' cup. She looked out the rain-blurred window at the street sign. West Wacker, not West Randolph. A black Honda Civic, her Uber, was just now pulling up 20 yards ahead. "Oh my God." The words left Jade in a single mortified exhale. Heat climbed her neck. "I am so sorry. I thought the light was blinking and your car." She grabbed the door handle. I'm gone. I'm so sorry." "Hey." The woman's voice was calm, not impatient. "You're fine. It's pouring." Jade paused. She looked through the windshield. In the time it had taken for this exchange, her actual Uber had inched forward in the line of traffic, past the spot where she'd boarded. She could see the driver's head swiveling, searching. And the rain. The rain had upgraded itself from aggressive to genuinely hostile, a wall of freezing water that spattered against the window like applause. She looked at the woman in the front seat. The woman looked back at her. "Your driver's going to cancel in about 45 seconds, the woman said. "You clearly just left somewhere, and your heels are going to ruin in that." A pause. "Also, for what it's worth, this is the 4th person who's mistaken my car for an Uber tonight. I think I need a sign that says not for hire." Despite herself, Jade laughed. It started as a short, startled sound, and then it kept going. Real laughter, the kind that unclenches something in your chest. The kind she hadn't heard herself make since before the breakup, before the promotion fell through, before the whole last 4 months of everything feeling like a long gray hallway with no door at the end. The woman in the front seat smiled too. Not a polite smile, but a real one, slow and surprised, like she hadn't expected it either. On her phone, a notification appeared. "Your driver has moved on. Rate your trip." "Well," Jade said. She settled back into the seat. "I guess I'm here." Her name was Cassidy Hayes. She offered it the way women in Chicago often do in circumstances like these, practically, without ceremony, like handing someone an umbrella. She was 29, an ER nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and she was parked on West Wacker because she was waiting for her roommate, Priya, who had texted 40 minutes ago saying she was 10 minutes away from a birthday party at the Velvet Room. Cassidy had just finished a 12-hour shift, evening to morning, a baptism by adrenaline and paperwork, and had Priya's keys because Priya had locked herself out that morning, which was why Cassidy was parked in the rain at midnight instead of asleep. "So you weren't planning to go out," Jade said, half-twisted in the back seat, so she could see the woman properly. She'd stopped trying to get another Uber. The surge pricing had tipped from expensive to surreal. "You've been sitting here for 40 minutes. In my defense," Cassidy said, "I had a very good playlist." She tapped her phone. "Also, Priya's texted 3 more 10 minutes away since you sat down. I give her another hour." "That's either very patient or very tired." "Both," Cassidy said simply. "Mostly tired." She tilted her head back against the headrest and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and in that brief second Jade caught something. Not sadness exactly, but weight. The particular tiredness that lives behind the eyes of people who have held other people together all day long. "Yar?" Jade asked. "Yeah. How do you know?" "The scrubs. And the way you said mostly tired. Like tired is a baseline and you've learned to perform on top of it." Cassidy turned to look at her in the rear-view mirror. Her eyes found Jade's and held them for a moment, a beat longer than a casual glance. "That's very perceptive for someone who climbed into a stranger's car at midnight. I'm a graphic designer. I notice things." Jade pulled one boot off and rubbed her ankle. "We're basically paid to notice what other people skip." "What do you notice right now?" Jade thought about it. She looked at the cluttered dashboard. The Dunkin' cup, the little potted succulent in a rubber holder near the vent, a sticker on the glove box that said "Science is real." She looked at the hands resting on the steering wheel, the nails clipped short the way hands that work are kept. "I notice you've been alone for a long time tonight," Jade said. "And you didn't mind me getting in, as much as you pretended to." A silence followed. Outside, a distant siren colored the air and faded. Cassidy gave the smallest smile, barely visible in the dark.
"Yeah, well.
Don't get ideas. I still think you should pay a toll for the seat." "Name it. Tell me something real." Cassidy said it lightly, like a dare. "Not your job, not where you live. Something real." Jade considered this. "I haven't been to a birthday party in 2 years without thinking about her," she said, and was surprised to hear herself say it. "My ex. We used to go to everything together. Tonight was the first time I went alone and forgot to miss her for more than an hour." Cassidy was quiet for a moment. "That's a good thing. The forgetting." "I know. That's why it hit me so hard when I remembered." "How long ago?" 6 months. She moved to Portland. We ended it, mutually civilly, all the right words. Which somehow makes it worse. There's no villain. I just have this empty space shaped like someone who isn't coming back. She hadn't said that to anyone. Not Simone, not her therapist, not the journal her sister had bought her. It had just sat there in her chest like a stone, and she'd been carrying it to every room she walked into. "My toll," Cassidy said quietly. "Yeah," Jade said. "Your toll." At 12:22 a.m., Priya sent a text that said, "Cass, I'm so sorry I met someone at the bar and she's... Okay, look, I'm going to take her Uber, and I'll get my keys tomorrow from the super, okay? I love you so much, please don't be mad." Cassidy read it, exhaled a long, controlled breath, and let her head fall forward onto the steering wheel. "Let me guess," Jade said from the back seat. "She found someone." "Priya," Cassidy confirmed, to the steering wheel. "She does this twice a year minimum." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "And I can't even be angry because she once drove an hour and a half in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had strep, so... Karmic debt." "So you're free," Jade observed. "So I'm free." Cassidy looked at the street. The rain had intensified again, hammering, insistent, turning the streetlights into something impressionist. A cab went past and threw a wave of water onto the curb. "And a 20-minute drive across town and this feels genuinely unpleasant. My building has a cafe on the ground floor," Jade said before she'd made any conscious decision to say it. "It's open until 2 on weekends. They have very good chai, and the seats have armrests." Cassidy turned around in her seat, actually turned, not just the rear-view mirror, and looked at Jade directly. She had a way of looking that was direct without being aggressive, the kind of steady attention that probably served her well in an emergency room, the ability to make a person feel truly seen. "Are you inviting me for chai?" she said. "I'm inviting you to escape the rain," Jade said carefully, though they both understood perfectly well what she was doing. Cassidy held the look for 1 more second. Then she put the car in drive. "Lincoln Park," she said. "Lincoln Park," Jade confirmed. They got 4 blocks before the GPS rerouted them. A water main break on North Clark had closed 3 streets and traffic was being diverted in looping, nonsensical patterns. Cassidy navigated without anxiety, one hand on the wheel, moving through the wet, dark city with the ease of someone who knew its moods. Jade watched the city out the window and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Comfortable. Not performed comfort, not the forced ease of a woman pretending to be fine at a party, actual, specific, present-tense comfort. "What made you become a nurse?" she asked. "My grandmother," Cassidy said. "She had a stroke when I was 14. I watched the nurses, not the doctors, the nurses, hold her together. Hold us together. They knew her name. They knew she liked her blankets tucked in a specific way. They remembered her birthday." She paused. "I thought, those are the people who are actually in it. In it. Present. Not managing from a distance. In it with you." Jade turned that over in her mind. "Do you miss anything about before nursing?" "I miss sleeping," Cassidy said dryly. Then, softer. "I miss being surprised by people. You see enough of how people fall apart, and it starts to feel like you understand human nature at its most stripped down. Which is true, but sometimes you want, I don't know, unexpectedness. Like a woman getting in your car at midnight. Exactly like that. A beat. Your turn. What made you a graphic designer?" "I wanted to make things beautiful," Jade said. "Simple as that. I was the kid who redrew the covers of her textbooks, who spent an entire summer making collages of words cut from magazines. I've always believed that how something looks changes how it feels. That aesthetics aren't shallow, they're a form of care. I think that's the same reason I became a nurse." Jade blinked. "How so?" "How something is held changes how it heals. The angle of a pillow. Whether someone speaks to a patient quietly or quickly. The way you position your hands." Cassidy glanced in the rear-view mirror. "Presentation is a form of care." Jade stared at her reflection in the glass, at the woman in the front seat who had just articulated in 2 sentences something Jade had been trying to explain to clients and friends and her skeptical father for a decade. "I think," Jade said slowly, "that you might be the most interesting person I've met in a year." Cassidy laughed, a short, surprised sound genuine. "You climbed into my car uninvited. Doesn't make it less true." Kettle and Company occupied the ground floor of Jade's building on North Burling Street, a warm, narrow cafe with Edison bulbs and a back wall covered entirely in a hand-painted mural of migratory birds. It smelled like cardamom and toasted bread and the kind of warmth that cities never quite extinguish even at 1 a.m. At this hour it was quiet. 2 women in a corner booth with laptops, a barista with an undercut who was vigorously rereading a paperback between orders, and now Jade and Cassidy, taking a table near the window where the rain made patterns on the glass like amateur calligraphy. They ordered chai for Cassidy and a courte-à-deux for Jade, who had decided that if she was going to be awake at 1 a.m. with a stranger who was quickly becoming something other than a stranger, she wanted to be fully awake for it. "Tell me something about this place," Cassidy said, wrapping both hands around the mug, and she didn't mean the cafe. She meant Chicago. She meant Jade's Chicago. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 3 years, Jade said. "I moved here after my MFA at DePaul. I used to run in Lincoln Park every morning before my anxiety convinced me otherwise. I know which corner store sells the best tamales at 11 p.m. and which bookstore has the clerk who recommends things based on your face rather than what you say you like." She paused. "I know the city the way you know a person you've been living with, not romance, but intimacy. All the good parts and the inconvenient ones." "I came to Chicago from Atlanta," Cassidy said. "Northwestern recruited me out of Emory's nursing program. I've been here 4 years, and I still feel like a guest." She looked out the window. "Atlanta has this ease to it, an assumption of warmth. Chicago assumes nothing." "Is that bad?" "No," Cassidy said, thinking about it. "It means when it gives you something, it's real." Their cups left rings on the small table. The barista put a record on, something slow and instrumental, muted trumpet, a rhythm section that didn't hurry anywhere. Jade found herself thinking that she would remember the exact quality of this moment, the specific orange of the light, the smell of cardamom, the way Cassidy held her mug with both hands like it was something precious. "What happened today?" Jade said. "In the ER. If you can tell me." Cassidy was quiet for a moment. "A young woman came in. 22. Fall from a fire escape, accidental. We worked on her for 3 hours." She looked at the table. "She was fine. Eventually. But for a while it was It was one of those shifts where everything narrows to one point and you just work. You don't let yourself feel it until after. A pause. This is after. Is that why you didn't mind me getting in the car? Jade asked softly. Because after is hard to be in alone? Cassidy looked at her across the small table, and there was a long, careful moment. Yeah, she said. Something like that. They stayed until 2 a.m., until the barista with the undercut called closing gently across the cafe, and they surfaced from conversation like women coming up from deep water, blinking, disoriented by the return of the ordinary world. They had talked about everything. Their mothers, Cassidy's formidable, Jade's anxiously loving, the best albums of the last 5 years. They disagreed passionately and Jade loved it. What home meant to each of them, whether it was possible to love a city the way you loved a person. They had not run out of things to say. They showed no signs of running out. Outside, the rain had gone quiet, leaving the street rinsed and gleaming, every surface reflecting the amber streetlights back doubled. Chicago after rain looks like a city that has been washed clean of its secrets and is briefly and beautifully open. They stood on the sidewalk outside the cafe, facing each other, and neither of them moved toward the car. The night was cold now, clear cold, the kind that follows rain, a temperature that makes everything sharp and outlined. Their breath made small visible clouds. The street was empty except for a cat moving with great purpose across the far corner, and the city at this distance hummed rather than roared, a bass note under everything. Thank you, Jade said, for not making me feel insane for sitting in your car. Thank you for sitting in it, Cassidy said. She was leaning back slightly against her car now, one shoulder on the door, arms loosely folded. Not guarded, contained. There was a difference. This was the opposite of what I expected tonight to be. What did you expect? A Priya pickup, a bad episode of something on my phone, and a frozen dinner. A small pause. Not this. Jade laughed softly. Not accidentally interesting company. You're not accidentally interesting, Cassidy said. Her voice had shifted slightly, something had come off it, some outer layer. You're very deliberately interesting and you know it. I really don't, Jade said and meant it. I haven't felt interesting in months. I've felt like someone who used to be interesting and has been waiting to get back to herself. Cassidy was looking at her. That same direct, quiet look, patient the way still water is patient. You didn't look like that tonight. You looked like someone who'd forgotten she was interesting and was remembering it in real time. Jade felt the words land. She felt them somewhere in her sternum, somewhere that had been very still and quiet for a long time. She took a step forward, just one, and the space between them narrowed from conversational to something else, something with texture and charge. Can I ask you something? Jade said. You can ask me anything. Did you want me to stay in the car? Earlier. Not because you didn't mind, because you actually wanted me to? Cassidy held her gaze. A beat passed and another. Yes, she said quietly. Jade stepped in. She had meant to say something else, a follow-up, another question, more of this conversation that felt like something she'd been hungry for without knowing what it was. But Cassidy had answered so honestly, with such simple directness, that speech felt suddenly redundant. Jade brought her hand up and rested it lightly at the side of Cassidy's face, the way you touch something you're not sure is real, and Cassidy went entirely still, not pulling back, not moving forward, just breathing. Then she leaned in. The kiss was unhurried. That was the word for it, unhurried, as if both of them had quietly decided that there was no emergency, no race, that this specific moment was the only place either of them needed to be. Cassidy's hand found the front of Jade's coat, not grabbing but gathering, a slow warm fist of fabric. Jade felt her exhale, felt it against her own mouth as a small releasing sigh, the sound of something set down after a long time of carrying. When they pulled back, a breath's width apart, the cold air came between them again, thin and real. Hi, Cassidy said, very quietly, the way you say it when you mean something else entirely. Hi, Jade said back and smiled. The cat crossed the street again, apparently having reconsidered something. A taxi passed 2 blocks over, its light off. Somewhere nearby, a bar was closing, voices spilling briefly onto the cold air before a door swallowed them back. I should go, Cassidy said. She was still close, not moving toward her car, which undermined the statement somewhat. You should sleep, Jade agreed. You've been awake for 17 hours. 17 and a half. Even worse. But she wasn't moving either. Will you give me your number? I was going to ask you the same thing, Cassidy said, which felt very forward for a woman whose car you broke into. I didn't break. I opened an unlocked door. You are very committed to that version of events. Jade laughed and got out her phone, and they traded numbers on the cold, wet sidewalk with the efficiency of women who intended to use them, and then Cassidy pushed off the car door and straightened to her full height and looked at Jade with something warm and new in her expression. Get inside, Cassidy said. You're shivering. I'm not. You are a little. She realized. Not unpleasantly. The text started Saturday morning. Cassidy, at 8 a.m., off night shift, got home safe. My frozen dinner was terrible. The night was worth it anyway. Jade, still in bed, hair in a loose braid, had read it 4 times before responding. The chai or the company? Definitely the company. They texted the way some people have conversations, long, winding, full of detours. Cassidy sent Jade a photo of a small ceramic pot she'd found in a thrift store. This is for my succulent's new friend. Do you think succulents get lonely? Jade sent Cassidy a color swatch she'd been building for a project, a sequence of deep sea blues and black greens, trying to make something that feels like underwater at night. Thoughts? Cassidy wrote back. It feels like something you're afraid of, but going toward anyway. I think that's right. Jade had saved that one. Wednesday afternoon, Jade walked through Lincoln Park with her headphones in and found herself listening to the slow jazz from the cafe and thinking about the way Cassidy had held her mug and the way she'd laughed, startled, as if joy still occasionally caught her off guard, and the way she had looked standing under the amber streetlight, leaning against her car, like a woman in the last frame of a film that ends just right. Wednesday evening, Cassidy called instead of texting, which felt significant, and they talked for 2 hours sitting on opposite ends of the city, and Jade had curled her feet under her on the couch the way she did only when she was comfortable, and Cassidy had said, I'm going to be honest, I keep finding reasons to text you, which for me is unusual. And Jade had said, I keep finding reasons to look at my phone, which for me is also unusual. And there was a silence on the line that had weight and warmth. Saturday. Cassidy had said. Saturday. Jade had confirmed. They met at the Green City Market at 10 a.m., which on a November Saturday in Chicago is either an act of love or insanity, and the two are sometimes the same thing. Cassidy was already there when Jade arrived, standing near the honey vendor with her hands around a paper coffee cup, wearing a cream-colored turtleneck under a dark coat, hair down for the first time. She looked different and completely familiar, the way people look when they step out of the specific context in which you first encountered them and reveal that they're whole in every setting. She saw Jade and raised her cup. Jade walked toward her and felt, this was the only word, pulled. They walked the market for an hour and a half, stopping at the cheese vendor and a stand selling late-harvest apples and a woman who made hand-poured candles and let Cassidy smell each one until Cassidy found one that smelled like the forest after rain and declared it necessary. They argued amiably about whether cilantro was a gift or a punishment. Cassidy. Gift. Jade. Undecided, leaning punishment. They tasted bread samples and a hot cider that came in tiny paper cups and warmed their hands as much as their throats. At one point, Jade reached for an apple to examine it, and Cassidy's hand was already there, and their fingers touched, and neither of them moved away. Cassidy turned her hand over unhurried and laced her fingers through Jade's as simply as if they'd been doing it for years, and they stood there among the apples and the noise of the market and the clean November air, and Jade felt the last of the 6-month weight lift out of her chest and simply dissolve. Hi, she said, again quietly. The word felt like a tradition now. Hi, Cassidy said back. She squeezed her hand. They walked until the market was closing, and then Jade took her to a restaurant 3 blocks south, a narrow, low-lit place called Wren's, with tables so small you were always somewhat in the other person's space, which on this particular afternoon felt like a feature rather than a flaw. They ordered the mushroom toast and the winter squash soup and a bottle of Gruner Veltliner, and sat across from each other with their knees nearly touching and talked, seriously and nonsensically, taking turns, the conversation shifting gears as easily as breathing. Are you scared? Cassidy asked at one point, direct as always, setting her wine glass down. Of what? Of this. A small gesture between them. I know you're not long out of something. Jade thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to think about things lately, without the cushioning she usually applied to hard feelings. 6 months ago, I would have been, she said. 2 weeks ago, I would have been. She looked at Cassidy. But I think the fear is about something specific, and you're not that specific thing. You're something completely different. Something better, hopefully, Cassidy said with a glint of something playful. Something entirely its own, Jade said. Which is better? I'm scared too, Cassidy admitted more quietly. I've dated, obviously, but I haven't let anything go somewhere in a long time. I come home from shifts, and I'm tired in my bones, and I tell myself there isn't room, that I don't have enough left over. But Cassidy tilted her head slightly, a small private smile. But I've been thinking about you every day this week, and the truth is it hasn't felt like it takes anything. It feels like getting something back. The wine sat unfinished. The afternoon turned blue in the windows. Neither of them brought up leaving. They walked back to Jade's building in the early dark, which comes fast in Chicago in November, dropping its curtain at 4:30 and transforming the streets into something amber and intimate. They were still holding hands. It had simply not occurred to either of them to stop, and the candle from the market was in the crook of Cassidy's arm in a paper bag, and Jade was thinking about how the afternoon had felt like many afternoons compressed into one, a kind of temporal luxury. At the door to Jade's building she turned and they stood face to face on the step, and the city moved around them, indifferent as it always is, and the light was the color of old gold. "Come up," Jade said. Cassidy studied her face. "You sure? I'm going to make very strong tea and put a record on and show you the project I'm working on. That is all I am proposing. And if I fall asleep on your couch, I'll put a blanket on you." Jade paused. "I have a very good blanket." Cassidy laughed, and it was the laugh Jade was already thinking of as hers, the surprised, genuine one. She reached out and straightened the collar of Jade's coat, a small, proprietary gesture, the kind you make with someone you feel you have some claim to, and then she leaned in and kissed her again, right there on the step with the amber city around them. This kiss was different from the one on the street. That one had been about discovery. First contact, the exhilarating uncertainty of it. This one was about recognition. Cassidy kissed her like she meant to, both hands now framing Jade's face with a gentleness that Jade felt in every nerve ending, fingers warm at her jaw, thumbs tracing the curve of her cheekbones. Jade stepped into her, closing the last few inches between them and feeling the solid warmth of her, cedar and clean laundry and something faint like the cold outside that she'd been walking in all afternoon. When they parted, both of them were breathing a little differently than they had been. "Strong tea," Cassidy said, a little unevenly. "Very strong tea," Jade confirmed, and unlocked the door. Jade's apartment was on the 4th floor. 2 bedrooms, high ceilings, the walls covered in a way that would have seemed chaotic to anyone who didn't know her and was completely logical to anyone who did. Tear sheets from design books, next to her own printed work next to a botanical print her mother had brought from a market in New Orleans. A shelf of novels organized by color. A drafting table with the lights on above it, a half-finished project spread across it, a brand identity system for a community garden, all warm greens and hand-drawn type. Cassidy stood in the middle of it and turned slowly, taking it all in, and Jade stood in the doorway to the kitchen watching her do it, watching her look at every surface the way Jade had looked at her in the car on that first night, like she was trying to understand the whole person from the evidence of how they'd arranged the world around themselves. "You're very you," Cassidy said finally, which was the best possible review. "I take that as a compliment. It is absolutely one." Jade made tea, an assam with cardamom, the way her grandmother had taught her, and Cassidy sat on the floor next to the drafting table while Jade explained the project. A community garden collective on the south side that had asked for branding that felt alive, not institutional, that captured the feeling of soil and growth without being precious about it. She showed Cassidy the mark she'd been developing, a circle of leaves that was also, if you looked correctly, for hands. "For hands," Cassidy said, leaning in. "Community," Jade said. "Support. Also just hands are beautiful. People don't look at their own hands enough." Cassidy looked at her own hands. She had the habit of it, they both noticed, and Jade felt the shape of the earlier conversation about nursing, about hands that know how to hold. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I think it's the best thing I've seen in a long time. The mark. I mean that." And from Cassidy, Jade understood that was not a casual thing to say. They listened to a record, Talk Spirit of Eden, which Cassidy didn't know, and sat with eyes closed for the first 10 minutes, completely still, head tilted, and Jade watched her listen, and felt something so tender and specific for this woman she had known for 1 week that it almost made her laugh at herself. Almost. Cassidy fell asleep on the couch at 7:30 p.m., the candle from the market sitting unlit on the coffee table, her tea 3/4 finished. She fell asleep mid-sentence, which Jade found extraordinary, the sheer exhaustion of her schedule dropping its weight the moment she was warm and safe, her body simply making the decision without consulting her. Jade got the very good blanket. She stood for a moment looking at this woman. This stranger turned something else. This wrong Uber at midnight. This cedar and clean laundry woman on her couch. And thought about doors that open by accident and the things you find on the other side of them. She thought about the 6 months of gray hallway and how a person can mistake absence for safety and safety for solitude and solitude for fine. She draped the blanket over Cassidy and turned the record over, volume low, and went to her drafting table and worked for an hour and a half, the best hour and a half of work she'd done in months, ideas coming fast and clear and with a kind of confidence she'd been waiting to get back. And when she finally looked over, Cassidy was still sleeping, face soft, one hand tucked under her cheek. It is 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Jade Morrison is standing barefoot in her kitchen making coffee, watching the city lighten from black to gray to a deep thin blue, and she is, this is the word, the only word, happy. Not the performed kind. Not the managed kind she'd been packaging for dinner parties and Instagram and Friday nights out with Simone. The actual, present tense, bottom of the chest kind that doesn't need witnesses. Cassidy is asleep in the bedroom, home from a night shift at 5:30. She'd let herself in with the key Jade had made for her 2 weeks ago, not with ceremony, but the way you hand someone a key when it has simply become logical, when the question of whether someone belongs in your space has been answered so thoroughly that the key is almost administrative. And Jade had heard her come in, heard the careful sounds of someone trying not to wake you, and had lain in the dark for a moment smiling at the ceiling before getting up to make coffee. There is a succulent on the windowsill now, next to Jade's old one. Cassidy had brought it over in its new ceramic pot, the thrift store one. They sit together in the morning light, small and quietly alive. Jade's phone buzzes on the counter. Simone, sending a voice note, which she always does at terrible hours. Okay, so are you going to tell me who she is? Because you've been annoyingly glowy for 3 weeks, and I am your best friend, and I deserve details. I also want to point out that you came alone to my birthday, and you've come alone to nothing since, and I need you to understand that I am fully taking credit for this because it was my party. Call me. Love you. Also, I want to see pictures. Jade smiles at her phone. She will call Simone. She will tell her everything, starting with, I got in the wrong car. She will tell her about a woman leaning against a car in the rain with that expression, bewildered and amused in equal parts, and a voice that she heard once and immediately wanted to keep hearing. She will tell her about chai at 1 a.m. and the walk in the market and the 4 hands mark and the blanket and the key that was almost administrative. But not yet. She carries 2 cups of coffee to the bedroom. Cassidy is awake, barely, half awake at best, lying on her side with her eyes at half-mast and her hair spreading across the pillow, and she sees Jade in the doorway with the 2 cups, and her face does the thing it has started to do, the slow morning smile, the one that comes before anything is decided. Hi, she says. Hi, Jade says. I made coffee. Come here, Cassidy says. Jade sets the cups on the nightstand and slides back into bed, and Cassidy pulls her in by the wrist and tucks her arm around her, and they lie in the blue morning light with the city coming alive outside, and Jade thinks about doors again. The ones you choose, and the ones that just open in front of you in the dark, and the way you can't always tell the difference until you're already through. Cassidy turns her head and kisses her slowly, warmly, without hurry. A good morning kiss, the kind that's been learned, that knows where it's going. The coffee gets cold on the nightstand. Neither of them minds. Outside, Chicago goes about its business. The lake shines pewter in the morning light. The streets fill. Somewhere on the south side, a community garden puts up new signage with 4 hands that make a circle, and somebody photographs it, and it gets shared, and a woman who stayed too long in a gray hallway comes home in it. In the work she made, in the city she loves, in the particular good right warmth of a morning that started as a wrong door and became the most correct thing she has known in years.